Start the hearing. My name is Tamisha Civil, and I'll be chairing the hearing this morning. First, we would like to read a letter from the governor. Dear counselors, I am pleased to nominate Andrew Hoffman to the position of Associate Justice of Juvenile Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Sincerely, Governor Maura Healey. Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
And would you like to introduce your family?
I would love
and witnesses?
Thank you. So I'll start behind me, Associate Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, Search George. Meredith Joseph, who is going to be one of my witnesses. Judge Helen Brown Bryant, who is the Chief Justice, First Justice of the Suffolk County Juvenile Court, is going to be one of my witnesses. Superior Court Justice Paul Wilson. And then over here, we have my daughter, Liliana Carter Hoffman. She's a 7th grader. She's 12 years old. And that's my wife, Bethia Carter. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. And let's start with your witnesses. We'll start with Honorable Helen Brown Bryant. Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here to speak on behalf of Attorney Andrew Hoffman, to be an Associate Justice, to become a colleague. I met Andrew many years ago when we were both working in the Boston Juvenile Court. It was a particularly fraught time for our court. The Committee for Public Counsel Services had decided to open up a children and family law office. And for the attorneys who were in the court, we didn't know what that meant for us who were private counsel. All kinds of rumors were circulating. We didn't know if that meant we were all going to be out of jobs. We didn't know if they were going to take all the cases. We didn't know if they were going to be spies. We just did not know what was happening. And I have to say, Andrew was the perfect person to head up that office. He came into the court, he respected the court, he respected the attorneys, and he worked really hard to seamlessly integrate into the court, to understand the culture of the court, to be a help to the court and to the council. It was great having him and the other attorneys as counsel on our cases. I became a judge. Andrew left that office, which really had run seamlessly while he was there, and I believe should sort of be the standard for how those types of offices work. He then went to private practice, and I had the pleasure of him appearing in front of me on some really difficult cases, both on the civil side in particular, cases that had gone on for a really long time that just weren't going anywhere. And I never saw him be unprofessional. Cases that can sometimes have 8 lawyers on it, all varying opinions, representing various individuals, and maintain professionalism. And with one particular case, we actually got it to end, which I never thought was going to happen. His colleagues appreciate him. My colleagues on the bench appreciate him. To be a juvenile court judge takes not only intellect, but there's also some compassion. That's part of the job. We're dealing with families in some of the most difficult situations. I often say that, we don't have the death penalty here in Massachusetts, but I think taking away someone's child, making that decision is about as close as you can come. And sometimes you have to do it. And I think Andrew is a person who is intellectually will be fine, understands the law, understands that he will have to. Sometimes you have to apply the law even when your heart might not be there, but you can always apply the law compassionately with respect for the people who are appearing before you. I really look forward to having him as a colleague. I'm delighted that he's here today. And I can't say enough good things about him, and I hope that I encourage you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but
Any questions, counselors?
You for being here.
thank you.
And next we have Meredith Joseph.
Good morning. My name is Meredith Joseph, and I'm honored and grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today in support of Attorney Andrew Hoffman's nomination for the position of Juvenile Court Judge. I've had the privilege of knowing Attorney Hoffman for over 14 years, initially in my role as a trial attorney at the Committee for Public Counsel Services, and today in my current role as pro bono counsel and Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Brown Rudnick, where I spearhead the law firm's global pro bono practice and inclusion initiatives. In 2011, I joined CPCS in the Children and Family Law Division as part of a large expansion of CPCS lawyers across the Commonwealth. Lucky for me, I was in the Boston office, where Attorney Hoffman was the managing attorney. Given my experience working as a trial attorney at CPCS under his supervision, I can say without hesitation, Attorney Hoffman is an exceptional lawyer, leader, and mentor. As a leader, Attorney Hoffman leads by example. Attorney Hoffman has the innate ability to elevate everyone around him. At the Boston Juvenile Court, I could see that lawyers instinctively elevated their level of professionalism, their level of preparation, and overall level of lawyering when they were assigned a case with Attorney Hoffman. His hard work, dedication to his clients, his respect for the law and the court itself helped to raise the bar for everyone else involved in the cases. This resulted in not only better outcomes for his clients, but often better outcomes for the clients of other lawyers who step up their game to try to keep pace with Attorney Hoffman. As a mentor, Attorney Hoffman was steady, thoughtful, and oh so very patient with me. He helped me navigate the complexities of trial work while offering support and encouragement. As you know, juvenile court is a challenging place for most clients. The halls are often filled with stress, uncertainty, and the days of decisions that impact the lives of children and families. Children and families who appear before the court are often facing incredibly tough circumstances, whether it's the trauma of separation, mental health challenges, substance abuse issues, or family instability. I remember on several occasions going back and across the street midday to the CPCS offices while the court was on break. I would be frustrated with what was happening on my case or worried about a client. Attorney Hoffman never hesitated to set aside what he was doing on his own cases to listen to me and offer guidance and support. I am sure there were times when he had urgent phone calls to make, emails to respond to, or he just simply wanted to quickly eat his lunch before heading back to court, but he never turned me away. He was not satisfied with simply training me and my peers to become effective advocates. He embraced the harder job of helping us grow into well-rounded, compassionate professionals who were committed to justice and fairness. Attorney Hoffman has many characteristics that will translate well into being a judge, including his ability to remain calm under pressure, provide clear guidance, and offer thoughtful feedback. He is also extremely organized and efficient. I have never met an attorney who keeps as neat and effective to-do lists on their legal pads. These are critical skills for any judge in a busy courtroom. Boston in many ways is a small town. After I left CPCS and Attorney Hoffman went into private practice, our professional paths continued to connect over the years in various ways. Attorney Hoffman's reputation for being a knowledgeable, reliable, and skilled advocate will be spoken about a lot today, and I absolutely wholeheartedly recommended his legal expertise over the years to friends and colleagues in need. However, I also want to take a moment today to underscore Attorney Hoffman's deep commitment to his family and to his community. Whether it is cheering on the sidelines of his daughter's youth sports games or attending community events, Attorney Hoffman is present and engaged. In my current role at Brown Rudnick, I've also had the opportunity to collaborate with Bethia Carter, Attorney Hoffman's wife. Similar to working with Attorney Hoffman, it has been an absolute pleasure working with Ms. Carter, and I've learned a lot. Recently, as I was preparing my remarks for today, my 9-year-old son was sitting at the kitchen table practicing his turn to read aloud the school's morning announcements. As part of the morning announcements, students recite the school pledge. The pledge says, "I pledge to be inclusive, respectful, responsible, and a continuous learner." When he read this aloud, I immediately thought, oh wait, can I just say that? Somehow this 3rd grade school pledge precisely captures exactly what I hope to convey to you about why Attorney Hoffman will make an excellent judge. Attorney Hoffman is respectful and responsible. We know that juvenile court judges have a difficult job that comes with great responsibility. Attorney Hoffman has a proven track record as being someone who treats everyone in the courtroom with respect and dignity, whether they are attorneys, court personnel, or families involved in cases. At CPCS, he seamlessly shouldered the incredible responsibility of managing a large regional office while juggling his own caseload. Attorney Hoffman is also a continuous learner. He understands the work of juvenile court is complex and at times heart-wrenching. It requires compassion and the ability to make thoughtful decisions based on law. It requires a commitment to being a continuous learner while simultaneously being an expert in the law. Great judges that I have seen understand how important it is to continuously learn about the families who come into the courtroom. Each family story is unique, as are the challenges that they face. Attorney Hoffman understands this. In closing, it is without reservation that I strongly support Attorney Hoffman's nomination for the position of juvenile court judge. I am confident he will make a significant impact in the juvenile court. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions, counselors?
Thank you.
Is there any opposition? Andrew, I will hand you the floor.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for having me here today. It truly is an honor. I appreciate it. And thank you, Councilor Civil, for chairing today's meeting. I'm grateful to Governor Healy, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll for nominating me, also to Paige Scott Reed and Derek Hasselheim for their guidance throughout this process. I also want to thank Valerie McCarthy and the Governor's Council Office for her assistance, the Judicial Nominating Commission for all its help in this and all of its work in this process, and finally, my family, friends, and supporters. Thank you for being here today. I'm very fortunate, and I found my calling a long time ago, which is working with children and families in the legal system. I didn't necessarily realize it while it was happening, but so many of my influences and experiences during my formative years led me in this direction. My mother was a first grade teacher for 30 years. She taught generations in our community. She was an institution, the glue, not just for our family, but for so many families. My father was a World War II veteran. He flew planes in the South Pacific. He was a true intellectual, a chemist by training, who became a patent attorney. My childhood was marked by stability. I can distinctly recall a sense of comfort that I had when I was little, when my mother would explain to me which relatives my brother and sister and I would go live with if anything ever happened to my mother and father. I still think about that to this day whenever I represent a child who's been separated from their family. My parents gave us the freedom to explore whatever we wanted and become whatever we wanted to be, but there was one important caveat attached, and that was that somehow had to be good. It had to be for the good of others. It had to matter. My mother told me all kinds of stuff that mothers are supposed to tell their children. Some of it stuck, some didn't, but for some reason, that one in particular stuck. Whatever I ended up doing as an adult, it had to be for the good of others. So as an adult and as an attorney, after starting out in civil legal services, I began representing parents and children in abuse and neglect cases. After, I don't know, a day, maybe 2 days of doing that, I knew I'd found my calling. For my parent clients, even though most had endured unspeakable heartache and trauma in their lives, having their children taken away was the absolute worst. It was their lowest point. And keep in mind that most of them had no idea how the legal process worked, what their rights were, what was likely to happen with their children. As their attorney, I had to try to gain their trust, help them make sense of their situation, and inspire them along a path forward. They had to know that I had their back. For my child clients, it was often what would have been my own worst nightmare come true, separation from their family. Terrified, confused, often worried about their pets, their siblings, their parents. It was striking to me how many of my children clients assumed that they'd been taken away because they had done something wrong. Giving my child clients a voice in the process was so important, making sure that the adults were taking into account how the child felt about all of this. Representing children and parents in these cases was the biggest challenge I ever faced, and I loved it. I was fulfilling the commitment that I made to my mother as a child, and it's been an honor and a privilege for the last 25 years to fight for my clients. Over the years, I've had some interesting cases. I could probably tell you some good war stories. More compelling to me, though, is the way that I've seen judges in the juvenile court make an impact on children and families, not so much in what they ruled, but in the way that they treated them. And what resonated most with me is how they never lost sight of the human element, the opportunity to positively impact children and families. I'll share a couple of quick examples. The first was very early in my career, one of my very first clients. I represented a mother with a sad history. Early in her life as a young parent, she had had her children removed from her permanently. And then in her mid-30s, she got pregnant again. Her child was removed at birth and quickly placed in a home in Western Massachusetts that wanted to adopt him. My client really tried to regain custody. She got into a residential treatment program. She did job training. I remember she used to ride the Peter Pan bus out to Springfield for visits every week. She never missed a visit. In the end, there was still too much risk. The judge terminated her parental rights. I've never forgotten how the judge handled the ruling. It was the first time I'd been through this, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. The judge didn't simply send out a written decision weeks later. Instead, she brought us into the court, and she addressed my client directly and explained her ruling. Most importantly, she reaffirmed my client's value as a human being. She told her she was a good person at a time that she didn't necessarily feel like she was a good person. I've come to learn that validation is often underrated. Words that we sometimes use casually, like dignity, empathy, and compassion, take on a real meaning in these circumstances. The second anecdote, it's not an individual case, but a particular judge's frequent practice. And this was in the delinquency session, with youth appearing in court that were sometimes being held in juvenile lockup. Most of them had family that came to the court, mothers, fathers, grandmothers. They'd be seated in the back of the courtroom. And at the end of the case, before the youth was going to be led back out of the courtroom, this judge would speak to the youth, and they'd suggest that they turn around and give their mother a hug. And then this hardened teenager would turn toward their mother, and suddenly they weren't so tough anymore. They would give each other a big hug and just hang on to each other as tight as they could. No matter what the youth had been charged with, the judge didn't lose sight of their humanity, and that this was still a family that loved each other. And to me, that was always the most important part of the entire proceeding. All courts are important. All courts solve problems, but none are quite like the juvenile court. The juvenile court's potential for protecting children while also supporting families, healing communities, and providing hope is inspiring. It's a system that doesn't run on its own, though. Someone has to make sure it's fair and that it works for the children and families that appear there. That's a responsibility and an opportunity that I would welcome if confirmed as a judge. I thank you for your consideration of me for my nomination as juvenile court judge. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my counselors that are here today, and they will be asking some questions. We have Chris Ianella with us here. We have Eunice Ziegler, Counselor Ziegler, Counselor Paul DiPaolo, Counselor Jacobs, and Counselor Maura Dolan. And we will start with Maura for questions.
Thank you so much. Congratulations, Attorney Hoffman,
Thank you.
for your nomination. I really appreciated your taking the time to speak with me, as well as throughout a wide-ranging discussion, really demonstrating how much thought you've given to the issues that we discussed and how many insights you have. So I just want to ask you a couple things that we had talked about. There was a story in the Boston Globe recently about what are known as 72-hour hearings where a child is taken into temporary custody by the Department of Children and Families. The parents are entitled to a hearing within 72 hours, but unfortunately, according to the Globe, that isn't happening in a lot of cases. And so I had asked you then, and I'm asking you now, what you would do as a judge, what you could do and what you would do as a judge to address that issue.
It's not an issue in every area of the Commonwealth, but in those areas where it's an issue, it is a big issue. It is arguably the most important problem facing the court. And like many problems, there's multiple causes. And so as a judge, there are some of those causes that a judge could do something about, some that I wouldn't be able to do as a judge, anything about parking or the commute. Those kinds of things. But I think a couple of I'd say two big areas where a judge really could have an impact. One of the issues is just the efficiency of the courts. These are attorneys that get paid by the hour. And so if there's a lot of, for lack of a better word, dead time sitting in court waiting for their cases to be called, it makes sense that they might not be all that thrilled about that setup and find other ways of making a living. So to the extent that a judge can help the court run more efficiently, I think that could be a big factor in retaining and attracting more attorneys. And the second is just the way that the judge runs the court. And what I mean by that is how they treat people. I know plenty of attorneys that complain about the parking, they complain about the commute, they complain about things, but when it comes right down to it, the reason that they have stopped taking cases in that court is because they don't appreciate the way that they're treated by the judge or judges. And that's been a real problem in some courts. And so, and I think there's no excuse for that. I think that's one thing that a judge certainly has plenty of control over, which is to treat everybody that appears with dignity and respect, and to make sure that not just that the judge handles it that way, but that the judge sets for the entire court.
Thank you. And we talked about sentencing.
Yes.
And I was pretty frank with you about my views. And these views, I think, are particularly applicable when it comes to children. You will be presiding over what are called delinquency proceedings. My view is that punishment is often counterproductive. It's traumatic, and trauma is never therapeutic. So when it comes to sentencing, my general view is that public safety comes first. When that's an issue, then someone absolutely needs to be in custody. But to the extent that there are benefits to a period of incarceration, those benefits are probably achieved pretty quickly. And they should be enrolled in programs, rehabilitation, counseling, and education programs in particular. So I asked you what your views were and how you would view sentencing for children.
Right, right. I agree with you. The community service has to be a top priority. I mean, as you're saying this, I'm looking over your shoulder at my wife and daughter. And that's my first concern. Our community has to be safe. I agree with you 100%. But I actually, one of the things that I would be most excited about if confirmed as a judge is the ability to get creative to some extent with sentencing, to really try and take a restorative approach and try and figure out how to match the response to the harm caused, certainly to the victim, to the community, but also to try and rehabilitate the young person. The goal being to help them get on a better path in life. We're lucky living in the eastern part of the state, but I don't think it's that different in other parts of the state, that there's a tremendous number of resources out there the potential collaborators. I know I shared with you, and I believe one of the other counselors, an example from some years ago that I was made aware of out in Pittsfield Juvenile Court, where the judge, quote unquote, sentenced young people to a community theater project. And it was taking responsibility. It was being part of a team. It was being forced to care for others that I think meant a lot more and was better for everybody involved than, as you said, simply locking them up. And so I'm frankly excited, if confirmed, about the idea of really getting creative and trying to think of ways to match the response to, like I said, different interests, the harm to the community, the harm to the victim, but also the young person and trying to help them out.
I'm excited about having you do that as well, and I hope that we can find some better alternatives and that over time we can demonstrate that there are things that work better than some of the things that we're currently doing. And I just want to ask you one more question, which is about education and the role that education plays in the lives, particularly of children. In my experience of working with clients of all ages, is that when you talk about education with them and you let them know that there are possibilities out there for them, without exception, they become animated. It excites them. They think that they may have an opportunity to do things they might not have had an opportunity to do. I want to order people into education because that's counterproductive. But to the extent that you could encourage the children who appear before you to continue to pursue their education, I think that would be wonderful. So if you could just.
Sure. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head. Education is such a huge piece of these cases, whether delinquency, care and protection, or we don't talk too much, but it's important as child requiring assistance cases. And as I always say, you don't find too many children in these cases who are doing well in school, and that's not a coincidence. And so there's a lot of parts of this work that are exhilarating. There are other parts that are depressing, and there are few that are more depressing than some of the children that you meet who've absolutely given up their education and in their future. And so getting them to re-engage, and they're not doing that, by the way, by choice. Children do well when they can. And so children that have experienced a lack of success in school, a lot of times it's just failure by the adults in their lives to find the right path for them. And so as a judge, that's something, if confirmed, that I certainly would want to focus on for those that are marginally engaged, increase that engagement. For those that have totally disengaged, figure out a way to get them back. And it might not be a traditional path. Again, the creativity that would be required is something that I would embrace. I would love to take on that challenge because that is so important, because without that, options are limited. Let's put it that way.
Thank you. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
views on that.
Counselor Iannone?
Thank you very much. Follow up on that sentence.
Sure.
I'm an attorney. I've never done. I've never appeared in juvenile court. What are the options for sentencing?
A wide variety. I mean, a judge has quite a bit of discretion. And some judges wield that, as I said, pretty creatively. And that's one of the hallmarks of the juvenile court is wide discretion for the judges. And so that's, if confirmed again, that's something that I would welcome. I think that there's a lot of opportunities to be creative. Certainly, as I mentioned before, taking public safety into account it's never not in the front of my mind, but really trying to figure out how to address the different, sometimes competing interests.
But for the people watching on Zoom,
Right.
they think sentencing, if you could.
Well,
you guys not going to jail.
well, so
Assume you know a ton.
right.
But the people on WebEx, they have no idea. So hold on. So when you talk about sentencing and punishment, people are wondering, like, you know, do they go to jail?
Yeah.
Do they go to jail? Or what jails do they go to? So if you could be,
Sure.
when you talk about being creative, but
Sure.
what happens to these kids? They do it. It's like, now you got a 12-year-old and he's charged with B&E, this section. What are the options for both judges?
Right.
The guy's got a terrible record.
Right. So certainly one option, and it's kind of the end of the road option, is juvenile detention, Department of Youth Services. It's a jail for young people. There's locked facilities. The one that I've spent the most time in representing clients is over here on Harvard Street in Dorchester, and it's scary. You go in, it's a locked facility that you gotta go through. They buzz you through the doors, and it's a jail. It's all young people, but it's a jail.
But like, it's not like I know jails like you got seated junction, you got shop. What do you?
No, I don't even know its technical name. We all call it Harvard Street. It's DYM, Harvard Street, because it's on Harvard Street.
It's not a jail, like,
No, it's not an adult jail,
that's what I mean.
but it's a jail for young people.
And how many people are usually in these, we'll call them these jails?
For males, I would say it's in the dozens. It fluctuates over time. For the females, it's actually very small at any given time, maybe less than double figures. But there are other ones around the state.
And they can't go out at all. Is that what you're
Well, they can earn their way up to get passes, but it is a lot.
They try to educate me. and the
Yeah,
people
yeah.
that-
No.
You're in jail, out of street jail, what does that mean? Can they take a job, can they go out for 2 hours, or most people in jail,
Right.
adult jail, you think of it, they're locked up, 6 o'clock, they shut the. Do they have bars? Help us out, assume we know nothing.
Right. It's a locked facility. They're not free to come and go. They're not free even within the facility. Everything is structured. They have, from the time they wake, when they're told to wake up to the time they go to bed, everything about their day is structured. They do have some educational opportunities, vocational opportunities, a lot of services, a lot of therapy.
Are they in the cell?
They are. It doesn't look like an adult jail quite like, but it is. It's a locked room. They often have roommates. They're not free to come and go from that as they wish. They can earn privileges, but for the most part, if they're sentenced to the DYS lockup, that's where they spend their time.
And how long can someone be sentenced to DYS lockup?
So the juvenile court has jurisdiction. It can be up to age 21. Most of them do not serve long-term sentences. There is something called youthful offender where they can be sentenced as an adult to an adult prison after they become an adult. But for the youth, typically, I don't know exactly, but you're usually talking about people that are committed for a few years. Is typical sentence. Some for the serious ones, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like a robbery.
Yeah.
But it's like their seventh offense, and would they go for a month or like, no?
No.
What's realistic?
Realistically, if I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into it, but certainly if it's somebody who's a serial offender, and as you said, this is their 7th one, that's certainly a factor that goes into it. They could do real time, meaning a few years. But there's a lot of alternatives to that, a lot of probation, a lot of conditions that requires them to do things in the community and meet with their probation officer. The point being to stay out of actual lockup and out of detention, required to go to school, required to participate in therapy, a lot of times to get a job or do other constructive things.
These people, is it the family life that is a factor? I mean, I know there's a lot of different factors, but these people who do A, B, C, D, like they come from broken homes, because I don't do any of this work.
Right. So perhaps not surprising, there's a big correlation with foster care. Children that grow up in foster care are disproportionately represented than the delinquency population. I'm fond of saying there's no bad kids. I'm fond of saying there's no bad kids. I think you're exactly right. I think most of them have had very difficult childhoods, a lot of trauma, a lot of lack of support, a lot of school failure. And a lot of them are in difficult situations. And so the behaviors that they're engaging in, frankly, might be the best of some really bad options for them.
And I'm a strong believer in rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration. But I just wonder, at that age, you talk about community service. Well, let me back it up. What's the youngest age that somebody could be in these lockups?
I'm not sure that there is an exact age for that. That is one of the factors that goes into the consideration. Obviously, I hope obviously the younger the child is. Right. Well, there's a bottom point for the jurisdiction of the juvenile court for those cases. But I think one of the big factors is age and also history. The younger you are, the less record you have, the less likely you would be to get locked up.
But I'm thinking to myself, okay, someone 11 years old, community service, realistically, it's not like someone as an adult, okay, you can do this. What can someone 11 years old do community service?
Right, and community service is not a good option for everybody. Part of it is the age and the ability to engage in that and get the benefit from that. The point being to take some responsibility. And there are some young people that just aren't ready to do that for age or for other reasons.
Yeah, it's a tough job being judged in the juvenile court. I get it. Now, let me ask this. Attorneys who represent these kids. I was gonna say I'd assume, but I don't know why I assume. I assume it's a small group of attorneys. I mean, a lot of attorneys can never do a juvenile court. You got someone like Kennedy, who's one of the premier defense attorneys in the state. I've never heard him do juvenile cases, but maybe he does. But am I right? It's a small group.
It depends on the community. In a place like Boston, it's a pretty robust group. But what we were talking about earlier with the shortage of attorneys on care and protection cases, sometimes that exists on the delinquency side too.
Most of these, you practice where?
I've been all over. I'm primarily Boston, Cambridge, but I get all over the place.
So most of the lawyers in Boston, are they court appointed?
Yes,
I think so, again.
yes, because, yes, for in the delinquency session, I couldn't give you numbers, but virtually all of them are court.
And I know times have changed. Who appoints these lawyers?
The court does, but they come from a list that have been certified by the Committee for Public Counsel Services.
So the old fashioned way. What do I mean by that? When I first started out a few years ago, I did court appointed work. And I would go to the BMC, West Roxbury, Dorchester, and the judge would say, okay, attorney so-and-so, attorney so-and-so. Now it's changed. In the juvenile court, do they still do it?
It's kind of like the way you're describing. You're there, yeah, you're there. It happened to me all the time. I'd be there on a case and the judge or probation officer or clerk or somebody would grab me and say, hey, we got a new arrest coming in. Can you take the case? That's how it works.
Called duty day.
Yeah, you have duty days, but there's also what I'd say on the fly. You need somebody and there's an attorney and you grab them. Thank you.
You've done a lot of this work, I think, at least the last 25 years.
Just about 25 years.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Thank you.
Educational, your education is fantastic. I think you're gonna be a great addition when your name comes before us, you can count on me.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, one more question. Sorry, just thought. Sure. These days, again, depending on the situation, a lot of courts, a ton of courts, do hearings, I'm not saying trials, by Zoom.
Yeah.
What's your position on that?
So, you know, since COVID, the last 4 or 5 years, I've been on Zoom way more than I have in person. I've gotten used to it. For non-evidentiary hearings, meaning where there's not going to be witnesses in court, or there's not something specific that needs to be handled. A lot of court appearances are really pretty brief. You don't need all that much time. I'm okay with doing them by Zoom. You know, I think my default setting probably would be, if it can be done by Zoom, to do it by Zoom. But certainly there's reasons why you would need to do it in person.
That's my take on it, especially, you know, you go to court, you gotta be a court man, and you hang around for so long. You know, people have childcare issues. I'm a big fan of, Zoom. I think overall, everyone is a winner.
It certainly has worked well for me. I have no objection to it.
Yeah. No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Ziegler?
Thank you, and thank you, Attorney Hoffman, for being here. Congratulations on getting to this stage. And thank you for taking the time to speak with me prior to this hearing today. I really enjoyed our conversation about your background. When I asked you why now, why the juvenile court, you expressed your love for the work and the detail about your experience and how you're drawn to it. We talked a little bit about your priorities. And you mentioned that you felt that the courts were well-resourced, but there could be more done to make it more efficient, and went into more detail about the mental health resources and substance abuse resources. Can you speak a little bit more to how you feel that you could make the court more efficient from that?
Right. Well, so I'd answer that on a couple levels. On kind of nuts and bolts efficiency of moving cases. I think there's a lot that a judge can do to just make sure that cases are in an orderly fashion, and to minimize the amount of time that people, and by people, I mean both attorneys and the parties, sit around waiting. So that's a big piece of it, just kind of court operations and making sure that that runs more efficiently. But then in terms of kind of outside the courtroom, outside the courthouse, the answer in so many cases on the civil side and the delinquency side is matching people with services and helping them to gain access to services. And so the same kind of toolkit that I have built as an attorney of relationships and finding resources, I think would be something that I would also want to do if confirmed as a judge. Building relationships with community resources, knowing who to direct people to, working with the attorneys, working with the parties, working with other actors in the process to try and make those linkages. I think that would go a long, long way. Certainly to helping families, but as a side benefit, efficiency of the process as well.
So, thank you for that. So you talked about you also talked about your experience with child requiring assistance cases and delinquency cases, which is something I like to see in candidates, that they have experience with both sides. because not all candidates that come before us do. What would you see yourself, as being a challenge, from the bench in terms of, overseeing, these types of cases?
Yeah. I think the delinquency cases kind of lend themselves to a little bit more orderly resolution, kind of the imposition of either sentence or conditions for the youth to follow. The CRA cases are, I think, the most difficult. And by that, I mean the ones that are least likely to lend themselves to an obvious or apparent solution. Lot of young people who are, like we've already talked about, are not experiencing any school success. That bleeds over into other areas of their lives that don't go well, creates problems at home. And the answers there are almost always service-based, but not always obvious. And even if the answers are obvious, getting them hooked up with services is often a problem. The example I frequently use is a lot of times the first step for a young child who's struggling in school and now has a CRA is getting a neuropsychological evaluation done. Good luck. Probably a waiting list of a year or so. And that's in the eastern part of the state where there's plenty of resources. God forbid you're somewhere less populated. Getting a therapist or other service provider, if English is not your first language, waiting list. So those are the kinds of things that can create real headaches and real problems for everybody, but also for the judge who is really trying to help guide this family towards a resolution.
It's definitely important. Another factor is, from the bench, you'd be setting the tone for the environment within the courtroom. Having been a practicing attorney for many, many years, you'd be on the other side, essentially holding attorneys accountable, ensuring that, they're well prepared to represent their, the litigants that they're serving. How would you go about ensuring that the attorneys were doing right by their clients?
Right. So that's always a challenge. As the judge, you're not the attorney, obviously, you're not the one trying to cater to the client. By the same token, you are responsible for upholding a level of competence and professionalism. There are formal mechanisms in place. There's complaint processes, things of that nature. That would not be my first step. I would really want to try and work with attorneys that I believe were struggling on a less formal basis. My goal would be to get everybody to be doing the best that they can do. Certainly, if I felt that somebody, a party was being misserved by their attorney, I would take action, but I would work really hard using whatever levers, whatever avenues available to me to try and get them the attorneys the help that they need to be as competent as possible.
I appreciate that. And I know we spoke about that a little bit in our prior conversation. We talked a little bit about access for folks who may have a disability. Maybe they're looking for sign language assistance. And, there was a hypothetical situation that we talked through a little bit about whether or not if someone were to appear before a court and not have those services in place and you were aware of it and you did relate to me that would be an instance that you wouldn't mind delaying that case until those services were in place. And that's something I will hold you to.
Right.
Because I think that it's.
I don't see how you couldn't do it that way. I don't.
No, for sure. My last question would be, we talked about, from the bench, just as a person in general, you have your own personal convictions, but from the bench, you would be beholden to the law. How you would balance your personal convictions with upholding the law in your courtroom.
Right. I think being an attorney is good training. These cases that I've represented many people over the last 25 years that I've absolutely loved, and I've represented many people that I didn't absolutely love and that really challenged my personal convictions. And yet you learn as an attorney that you do your job. Same as a judge. I'm not naive to think that I wouldn't be challenged personally if confirmed, and there wouldn't be people that push my particular buttons and hit my difficult spots. But I know that cannot be the rule of it's got to be the rule of law. It can't be the rule of a person. It's got to be the rule of law. So I know it'd be challenging, but I think being aware of it and being ready to take on that challenge is the important part.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate your responses and for taking the time to speak with me. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilor Ziegler. Councilor Kennedy?
To answer Counselor, I know this question, I do occasionally venture into the juvenile court, but it's always against my will.
There you go.
One of the problems I have that I've done some youthful offender work mostly, I've been in there, try not to do too much of it, but I get confused. But one of the things that I found extremely troubling is that when somebody has juvenile court cases that later turn into youthful offenders cases, and they're held in the juvenile court cases prior to getting sentenced on the youthful offender, they don't get credit for that time.
Doesn't seem fair.
Huh?
Doesn't seem fair.
How would you address that as a judge? I was stunned by that. Somebody did like 9 months in jail, you can call it what you want, it's jail, okay, and then it's dead time. They don't get credit on the youthful offender side.
I mean, the first thing I'd say is I'm bound to follow the law, but I think if the law states.
Follow the law, but there's, there's ways to structure things so that it's more fair.
Right. So to the extent there's any discretion, certainly I would exercise discretion. If there are some workarounds that I can see this coming down the road.
Workarounds.
What's that?
There's
always workarounds.
Workaround, you don't give as much time on the youthful offenders.
Right. I mean, if you see this coming down the road, there's ways of doing it. But I also think there's opportunities for judges when they see something that they think is wrong in the law, even though they're applying that law, is to have a voice and talk to the powers that be and work with their colleagues and try and figure out. I mean, I think probably some of the best, without being able to give you examples, but probably some of the best revisions to existing laws probably came from judges saying, this really isn't fair. This shouldn't be this way.
I just don't get people being held in custody and not getting credit for the time. It's whether, I don't care if they're juveniles or adults.
I'm with you. I'm with you. No, I'm with you.
American.
No, I'm with you.
Have you done a lot of delinquencies?
Yeah, nowhere near as much as on the civil side. But yeah, since I went out on my own as a solo practitioner in 2015, probably a year or so after that I started doing delinquencies. So no,
That was mostly.
it was all civil. I'd never set foot in a criminal courtroom before that.
Because I did notice on your governor's council questionnaire, you described your practice as 95% civil and 5% criminal.
Over the years.
They're referring to delinquencies when we say.
Yes, yeah, no adult criminal. The only criminal work I've done is juveniles. And that's kind of cumulative over the years. When I look at my career, I say 95-5 is a pretty good split. But at any given time, my delinquency work was a bigger piece of that in the last 8 to 10 years.
For the last approximately 10 years, you've been doing some delinquency.
A little bit less than that, but yeah.
What would be the percentage during that time period?
Probably 2/3, a third, maybe 75-25, something like that.
Be it the third being.
The smaller proportion being the delinquency side, yeah.
And what types of cases?
All types. I was not what's called YO certified by Committee for Public Counsel Services. So I was not supposed to be taking youthful offender cases. A lot of times I had clients that were already charged with something else and then they picked up a youthful offender charge and I was permitted to keep that. So those were some pretty serious physical violence. Assault.
I understand the youthful offender cases are more serious. That's why they're youthful offender.
Right.
But so.
A lot of assault and battery, stealing cars, break-ins, kind of a lot of things that seem to happen on the subway. That seemed to be a place that a lot of stuff happened, stealing.
Kids out in school, they're hanging out.
That's exactly right. And they're with their friends.
There's not enough jobs out there for them, things like that, so they get.
Idle time. Yeah, but that seemed like a lot of that.
Trials.
Yes.
Criminal.
Criminal side has not had a jury trial.
Okay.
Ton of evidentiary work, ton of motions, hearings, evidentiary hearings, but no actual jury trials. On the civil side, I couldn't even tell you. I mean, more trials than I could count. Termination of parental rights trials.
There's jury trials.
They're not jury trials, correct?
They're
all bench trials.
Right. So you're gonna be doing jury trials.
Right.
Obviously, you're gonna be presiding over them.
Right.
Okay, and the two lawyers that are in front of you probably have more experience with them than you do.
That's correct.
How are you gonna get up to speed?
About
3 or 4 lawyers.
right. Well, one of my most immediate steps, I've already talked to Judge Brown Bryan about coming in and observing. But certainly I'm counting on training from the juvenile court. And I think one of the things, if confirmed, that I would be most excited about is I know a lot of the judges on the juvenile court bench. You couldn't get a better group of people. I'm really excited to learn from my colleagues. I learn a lot of ways. I read a lot, I watch a lot, but I think my best style of learning is actually from my colleagues and from doing it. So that part of it is where I'm really going to be relying.
You have a long list of donations there.
Yeah, most
It doesn't look like a Republican list.
No, it's not. It's not.
It doesn't look like one Donald Trump would like.
Probably not.
I'm just curious, how do you know my friend Steve Altrino?
Well, so to be very transparent, those are all my wife's donations. She worked with him on some legislation.
Good guy from Malden.
She loves him.
Great guy.
She loves him, yeah.
I was,
It was it's the Hair Act, right? It was the right to young people being able to wear their hair the way that they want. And he was the sponsor of that
that was the
legislation.
charter school case, I remember that.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
not a good situation.
right. But he was a champion of that. He was great.
You do have a great resume, I agree with,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I know about that, you have a lot of experience, you seem very compassionate and dedicated to what you're doing.
Thank you.
I think that's the most important part is to become, especially a juvenile court judge, because it is the place where you can actually make a difference. You know, Council Civil was anxious to get you going. We had to postpone it a week on you, and she was kind enough to accommodate some of us who had conflicts.
Sure, I appreciate
Doesn't
that.
usually happen here. We usually hear every week, but last week it did, and I appreciate that. She's been a supporter of yours. Well, I have one more question. When did you file your application?
When did I find my application?
Yeah, for the judgeship.
Boy, I think it was June of last year. Don't quote me.
June
I
of
think
24?
so. I think that's right.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't have any other questions. I already told you that I'm gonna vote for you. On the phone, we had a long conversation. You're definitely qualified.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Kennedy. Counselor DiPaolo.
Thank you, Counselor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for the work you've done over the course of your
Sure.
career, working with vulnerable populations, especially children. One of my Counselor Ionela's line of questioning raised a few questions in my head I'd love to pursue further, because one thing it made me think about is so many of us in law, not all of us, of course, myself included, it sounds like you, relatively stable upbringing,
Yeah.
high school, maybe in an honors track, if that's what happens in your high school, college, law school. And there's not a lot of occasion to wrap your head around what your peers on other tracks are experiencing. And that was definitely my experience until I became an educator. And so I'm wondering, you know, you mentioned to Counselor Ionela that in certain instances, or maybe it was responding to Counselor Dolan, that we learn, you really have to engage with really what empathy and treating someone with dignity are because of the circumstances they're in. Another term that we use a lot lately, which I'm grateful for, is trauma informed.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, could you talk about what it means to you to have a trauma informed courtroom?
Right.
And how you might impact that as a judge?
Sure. No, I think understanding of trauma and having a trauma-informed courtroom is so vital to the process. No big insight here to say that almost all the people that appear in juvenile court, both parents and children, have a history of trauma. And then if you think about, I think to that, just the fact of being involved in juvenile court is in itself traumatic. I've been an attorney for a long time. I still get anxious before I go to court.
I had a great anecdote about a young man who's acting tough and then he turns around and hugs his mom or.
See it all the time.
sibling, and you see it all the time.
See it all the
And you
time.
break down when they walk out of the courtroom.
Yeah, you see it all the time. And so I can only imagine what it's like. I mean, I go in, I know everybody in the building. I'm used to being there. I know what I'm gonna do. I can't even imagine, and I'm still anxious. I can't imagine what it's like for my clients. And you're right, I don't have, there's people that get in this work for all kinds of reasons. Some have lived experience, some just love the litigation, some are civil rights attorneys. I don't have that lived experience. I'm very upfront about that. And so sometimes that does make it challenging to connect with my clients. But I think as a judge, if I'm confirmed, I think it starts with an acknowledgement of that is so, of that, what I mean is that this is traumatic. And that people have to be given the space, they have to be given the dignity, treated with respect. I think one of the things that you see a lot in this line of work is that manifestations of the trauma are seen and diagnosed as something else. I wish I had a nickel for every kid who's being given medication for ADHD, when really what it is, it's a trauma response. And so I think having trauma-informed treatment providers, there's a lot of therapists out there, not all of them are trauma-informed.
Can I ask you something?
Sure.
Do you know what an IEP is?
Sure, individualized education.
Education plan.
Sure.
And so in an IEP, there's accommodations that are provided.
Sure.
Are those relevant to a courtroom?
Certainly can be, yes. There's some people that because of a disability would not be able to come into a setting like this or to a courtroom and be able to participate in a we'll call an acceptable fashion.
Because I've walked into courtrooms with children who are being treated in the courtroom in ways that I would literally be, it would be legally impermissible. I would be violating the student's civil rights by doing to the student in a classroom what is being done to the student in the courtroom.
Yes.
And nobody
says anything.
too many people don't say anything, and I would venture too many people don't really know that that's the case.
I think you're right on that last point. I think that despite the fact that education, as I've said a few times today, is such an integral part of these situations, not enough attorneys and probably by side effect, not enough judges know enough about special education. And I think that's something that's been addressed well in the last several years in terms of training.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
I certainly think there's more that can be done.
Yeah, I went through CAFL training.
Oh, did you? Good, good,
many
good.
Years ago, and there was coverage of special education law, which is so important.
Right.
But if you're not with that kid, and most of us, again, we didn't necessarily go through school with an IEP.
Right.
Or if we did, we weren't necessarily, our accommodations were handling our needs.
Right, right. Yeah, so it's unfortunate that it's somewhat difficult administratively to, if you're an attorney for a kid that is already your client, and then you realize they have special education issues and they need legal representation.
Yeah.
Administratively, it can be difficult to be able to do that.
Can I tangent?
Sure.
Digress for a second?
Sure.
So CRAs you mentioned is
Yes.
very important, and that's the area I'm most familiar with.
Yeah.
And it's a child requiring assistance. And I want to get into how they intersect with education. But could you just, because I know some of my colleagues and the public would like to know, a child requiring assistance, you used to call it chins.
Right.
And how does a child requiring assistance end up before a judge?
Right. So a case has to be filed, a petition can be filed, and that can be filed by the parent, what's called a
Stubborn child?
Yeah, interesting choice of words, but stubborn child.
Yeah.
Schools are a source of a lot of them when kids are not coming to school or they're coming to school but not following the rules.
Let me ask you something. That's where I want to pause.
Yeah.
So when a school district comes in,
Yeah.
what is the school district's objective in referring that child?
You want
I'm
to,
not thinking of any particular school
Right.
district in my region, but I'm just wondering, what is the school district's motivation? What's their desired outcome?
right, I'll respond with the phrase my wife uses a lot. Do you want the PR version or you want the truth? I think in theory, well, I think in theory, the school is realizing that they're not meeting this child's needs. The child's either not coming or is coming and not doing well, not following the rules. Basically, when I say not doing well, not for grades, means they're not following the rules.
Disciplinary.
Yeah, you can be an F student and not have a CRA file. But if you come to school and are not following the rules or not coming to school, they'll file a CRA petition, a case in court. And in theory, the idea is to try and get help to help that child succeed in school. That's the PR version.
Can I pause for a second?
Yeah.
Are there trends that you've noticed, and this is a leading question that you don't have to answer, and I won't necessarily provide it. Are there trends in the timeline of when schools refer children as CRAs to the courts? Anecdotally, I've noticed that in my practice.
Well.
And I, as an educator, I know exactly why.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's something anyone talks about.
Well, yeah,
That's
that's
at certain times of year standardized tests happen that impacted districts.
imagine that. That's why I asked you if you want the PR version of the truth. The truth is that I think a lot of times the schools have ulterior agendas. They're either dumping kids on the court and shirking their responsibilities. For every CRA case that's filed, if the child's not already on an IEP, that's the first thing I look at is, should the child be on an IEP? Are you not serving this child's educational needs?
Right, so it'd be quicker to exclude a child than have to give them.
You're exactly-
Testing and the
You're exactly,
conditions they would have to have.
exactly right.
Okay, I don't want to dwell on that, but so the CRAs come in, and so then what happens to cut to the chase is there's conditions placed on them and there's a release, and then there's this, am I getting this right, 6 weeks?
Yeah, a lot of times, an overwhelming majority are handled on what's called an informal basis.
Yeah.
I mean, the court says, everybody kind of pause.
Yeah.
We're gonna try and figure out some conditions, some services to get in place to see if we can get this on the right track. Come back and see us in 90 days. That's
And there's conditions placed on the
a lot of
child,
times.
and are they crafted by the judge?
They're officially, yes, signed off on by the judge, but a lot of times they are formulated by the probation officer the parent. the
Do
school.
you've been in different courts, do different regions have different like standardized conditions? Are they standardized across? Is there a default that people go to?
I mean, most of them have some of the similar components, going to school, following the rules in school.
Do you ever see conditions that you think might be counterproductive or might be like, ooh, setting this kid
Oh,
up
yeah.
for failure?
Oh, yeah.
Why would those conditions be placed on a kid? Because I know statutorily we treat a child as a parent would.
Right,
You know, back to the DYS facility consideration, I don't know any parent who would send a child there
right.
purposefully other than in an extreme crisis. So I wonder how well we follow that anyway, based on the resources we have, but
Yeah. You know, I'm not sure. I think part of the answer is sometimes there are so many CRA cases and the court is trying to move them. And so the amount of time that each case required gets tripled.
yeah.
And then I think there's just some kind of, no ill intent, but just not thinking it all the way through. That if the child's already not succeeding in school and is not going to school because it's not a safe place and it's traumatic, and then putting a condition on saying you must go to school every day. How realistic is that?
It's not realistic.
That's right.
And what would be the outcome if come back in, let's say, 6 weeks and
Right.
your honor, this child has not been in
Right.
school?
So the worst case,
What are they-
the worst case scenario in a CRA case is the child can be removed from the parent, placed into DCF custody and sent to foster care or group home or
And
something.
you talked about DYS facilities a little bit. Have you ever visited a group home?
Oh, yeah.
What are group homes like for kids?
They're not anywhere that you'd want your child to go or that you would want to go as a child. Some are nice.
Intention, people can't handle the challenges there, right? As far as staffing.
I mean, when you end up in a group home, it's usually because lesser restrictive alternatives have not worked. And so what I mean by that is the children there tend to have pretty serious issues and require a lot of care. Some do quite well, and some of the group homes are better than others. And some are very well resourced and well operated, and probably do better than others. There are some that
For sure.
should be shut down.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. So I'm bringing this all into education.
Sure.
And I wonder, is continuity of education important to a child? I mean, how important is it? I guess I would say.
I think it's everything. I mean, I can speak for myself. I went K to 12, same cohort of kids the entire way. It was what I needed.
Right.
There's research out there that shows, so when children are removed from their home and placed in foster care, you think about, they're not just removed from their parents, but
Right.
their siblings, their pets, their school, their soccer, their dance class, everything. There's research that shows that every movement in foster care sets a kid back educationally 6 months. I don't know exactly how they measure that, but the idea is obvious that lack of continuity when you have to change schools is very harmful, traumatic.
And leads to increased undesirable behavior, which
Exactly.
increased consequences.
Yeah, it's the start of a lot of the child's later problems.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Because I know you talked about like delinquency as a problem, so I mean, in terms of attendance at school is what I mean.
Right.
But on the other hand, some children have the only stable thing in their life is school and the only stable adult. And so it would seem to me taking them out of school is almost as, I hate to compare it to taking from the family, but it's oftentimes the family isn't stable either.
No, you're right.
Teacher, but the school district is sending in someone who maybe doesn't even know the kid.
Right.
And there's no room for a teacher to input what the person who's spending 6 hours a day with the kid.
You're exactly right. I think that is such an important factor that needs to go in the calculus as a judge, if you're even going to remove the child in the first place. You got to think about these things. And maybe the risks end up balancing that way and you do need to disrupt the child's school. But you know what? Don't make the decision without at least seriously considering the impact.
And I loved what you were saying about creatively matching responses to behaviors, understanding community resources, that in some areas there's more community resources than others. Have you ever worked with CASA, point-appointed special advocates?
Yes, quite a bit.
Yeah. And so they're volunteers who come in and they serve as a stable adult.
Yes.
As the child is bouncing from
Yes.
between foster care and school.
Yes.
Court appearances. And do you see good relationships going on there between CASA and the court?
I'll give you a quick example that I think explains my answer. I've got a case over in Cambridge. It's a 2015 docket number, meaning it's been open 10 years, and this young man is nearing aging out of the system. And I've lost track of how many placements he's been through. He engaged in self-injurious behaviors. The only consistent in his life over the last 10 years has been his CASA.
And the kids who go through that program actually show demonstrable better outcomes.
No surprise.
Demonstrable better outcomes. So that's a Commonwealth. We're relying on this pool of volunteers, right? I mean, to do a lot of this work.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, CASA is not not available or not prevalent in all the areas.
Right, no, and Worcester County is one of the leaders of that, and
Right.
one of the reasons I'm familiar with that. And so when I'm thinking about matching resources like CASA or whatever else might be in the community, what I hear is that there's a lot of value to knowing what's in the community. And so the legislature needs to add more judges. And we need to be appointing judges who are from different parts of the state so that the folks making the decisions can seat them there logically, right? And we're not bouncing around and having folks like you drive all over the Commonwealth. And that's true in all of our courts, but as a Worcester representative, I'm particularly concerned.
Sure.
Particularly concerned with Worcester. I'm gonna leave it there. I appreciate your thoughtfulness with this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Counselor DiPaolo. Counselor Jacob?
Well, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you again.
On your nomination.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming out and spending so much time, and
It was a pleasure.
the conversation we had really was very illuminating about who you are and how you think, and I very much appreciated so much of what you had to share. As the last one, most of my questions have been asked already
Okay.
this morning, so rather than belabor it, I'm not gonna ask you any questions today, but I feel like I have a really good sense of who you are, and so, you know, just congratulations again.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Counselor Jacobs. And congratulations again, Andrew. My only question for you would be, what is pipeline to prison, and what would you do to make an effective change?
Right. So pipeline to prison is I think, pretty well documented phenomenon that children that get involved in these problematic situations, certainly in delinquency cases, but also care and protection cases, disruption, trauma, lack of school success, not surprisingly, as adults end up in prison. And there has to be a break somewhere. There has to be some intervention, something that it's not inevitable. It's not dictated when a child is 11 or 12 or 15 or even 17, that is going to be their life, that's their future, but there has to be some break. So that's where, again, to go back to some of the things we've already talked about today, thinking creatively as a judge, in terms of sentencing options, knowing the resources that are available, trying to match the harm caused with the resources that are out there to try and address the harm that was done, but also to really focus on the young person and get them on a different trajectory.
Thank you. Well, that concludes my questions, and thank you everyone for coming in today and supporting you, of course. And thank you for putting yourself out there, because you have the experience, you have the professional and the personal experience to be a juvenile justice judge. And I think you're going to do a great job. So thank you, and the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
hearing. And we have a letter from our Governor, Maura Healy. Dear counselors, I am pleased to nominate Jeannie Rhinehart to the position of Associate Justice of Juvenile Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Sincerely, Governor Maura Healy. And would you like to introduce your family and friends?
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for having me. I have my brother Xavier Rhinehart, Deputy Chief of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, Children and Family Law Division, Dan Mahoney. I have my Aunt Cindy, Aunt Stephanie, Aunt Jeanette. I have a good friend, colleague, Allison Cartwright. So a friend, Janita Williamson. Close friend from law school, Bessie John-Jacques, who's also a judge in Manhattan, New York, recently. And a god sister, Felicia Nabi, and I also have another cousin, Tara, present. And I have two witnesses, Priscilla Diaz, and also First Justice of the Norfolk County Juvenile Court, Justice Johnson, and I see also Judge Brown Bryant, First Justice of the Boston Juvenile Court, and also my former Managing Director, Nancy, who's present today, and also in support of me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming in today in the support of Jeannie Rhinehart. And we'll have Honorable Joseph Johnston start as your first witness.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Joe Johnston. I'm the First Justice of Norfolk County Juvenile Court, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak here before this Governor's Council in support of Jeannie Rhinehart's nomination to the court. Just say this is just a terrific nomination. I've known Attorney Rhinehart for 9 years. First, when I was assigned to the Suffolk County Juvenile Court, and then for the past 5.5 years at Norfolk County Juvenile Court. There were a couple cases that sort of stand out in my mind that Attorney Rhinehart was counsel of record on. I recall her representing a young man, a really young boy, who was on the autism spectrum in a care and protection case. And it was a very contested trial that went on for many days. And I was just so impressed with the advocacy of Attorney Rhinehart, her ability to understand all the special needs of this very special child. And I recall another case where Attorney Rhinehart represented a parent with significant cognitive limitations. And again, her advocacy and both the end result in both of those cases, in my view, had positive outcomes for her respective clients. She was a superb advocate. And you know, the stuff that we see in our court are some of the most difficult, painful, and emotional cases you'll ever see. And they require a judge's utmost care, deliberation, and attention. And I've presided on many of those cases in which Attorney Rhinehart was counsel. Her knowledge of the law, her zealous representation of her clients, her cool, calm, and respectful demeanor, particularly in those highly emotional cases, is really impressive, not only to the judges, but I think also to the counsel that appeared with her in those cases. Norfolk County, Attorney Rhinehart is the chair of our bench bar. We asked her to serve in this role because of her leadership ability. Does a terrific job bringing all of the collaterals that work with our court, attorneys, different department heads in our court, and these leadership abilities that she has stand out in her position as a supervising attorney in charge at the Children in Law Division of CPCS. In my view, my humble view, the juvenile court is the most important court on the planet because the work that we do really impacts the lives of families and children for generations. If confirmed by this council, I'm absolutely certain that Attorney Rhinehart will be an exceptional juvenile court judge and will make this council proud, moving along this nomination. Every attorney and every party that leaves Judge Rhinehart's courtroom will know that they had their day in court. that they were treated with dignity and with respect. So in conclusion, staying within my 2 minutes, I respectfully urge this council to confirm Attorney Julie Rhinehart, the juvenile court bench. And I welcome any questions that may come.
Thank you. Any questions, counselors?
Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
And I agree with you, it is the most important court.
Thank you. I brought some stats from you from our last hearing about detentions, but we can talk afterwards.
Okay.
Thank you.
Those are multi.
And your second witness, Priscilla Diaz.
Had the honor of sitting at a table like this to acknowledge anyone. But it is a pleasure to sit here and talk about Jeannie. Jeannie, I met actually before she worked for us at Dimmitt Community Health Center. I met her in the community through her mom. Her mom was an advocate for people as well. She advocated for me and helped me turn my life around. And I began a career at Dimmitt Community Health Center. And I had Jeannie come on board where she worked for us as a case manager. As a case manager, she was responsible for advocating for our families. UMIS was a program for multi-diagnosed women with children. She advocated for those women through the court systems, through the DSS workers. She had to link them into services in the community, and she did that. It was challenging because we had DCYF, we had probation, we had people in the community, in the recovering community, and she worked with them all. And she was empathetic and met their needs. It was a pleasure to have her on board. She got along with her co-workers. We did a lot of team building, and whatever it was we needed, she stepped up. In particular, we had twins coming to our program. At the time of their transition, they were on a lot of medications, and she took her time and she worked with mom, and she worked with the doctors and the nurses that would come to the program to see these babies and help them grow and develop. She was right there all along. She stood in and she did whatever was needed. And we so appreciate the work that she did. She left us for a little while to go to law school. And she did that, and she came back and still worked with us whenever she was on breaks. We really appreciate that, and it made a tremendous difference in our program. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any questions, counselors?
Good, thank you.
Is there any opposition? Okay,
There was a
Jeannie.
line out at security.
Hey, Jeannie, I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. And thank you for having me here. I wish to express my sincere thanks to Governor Maura Healey and Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll for the judicial nomination. I would also like to thank the governor's legal counsels, Attorney Paige Scott Reed and Attorney Dara Castleheim, and also a special thanks to Valerie McCarthy and her team. I would like to thank the Judicial Nomination Commission for selecting my application. I'd like to thank God, my family and friends and colleagues for the encouragement and support along the way. I grew up in Roxbury, raised by a strong, loving, and protective Southern woman. My mom was a social justice warrior, raised in Savannah, Georgia, and immersed herself in the civil rights movement by the time she was in high school. She came to Boston for a better life. Here in Boston, she found her community, and she immersed herself in it. My mother is the rock that I stand on. Unfortunately, she's not here today. She passed away in January of 2021. But I know she's here in spirit. Today is March 12th. It marks her 81st birthday, and I wish her a happy heavenly birthday. They say it takes a village to raise a child. My village was large, with many people who were not always related by blood, but who I grew to call auntie, uncle, cousins, and godmother. Many of them are here today. Community was a significant factor, not only in my personal life, but also in my present work. Children thrive in an environment where they can maintain those lifelong positive connections. In my current role, I often use the law to advocate on behalf of clients trying to maintain those connections. My mom was committed to providing every opportunity for my brother and me to thrive. Growing up, I sang in the choir. I took trips to see family in the South. I played piano. I performed at neighborhood recitals. I thought I had a pretty normal childhood. It was fun. I had fun with friends. However, one thing I didn't know, I didn't realize just how poor we were until I got older. And then I started to realize not everyone lived the way we did. What I didn't know, and I came to later understand, was our apartment of 1.5 bedroom was considered substandard housing. The living conditions of our apartment caused frequent trips to the doctor, impacted my asthma due to cold and the dampness of the apartment. There was often leaking ceilings because of the cracks in the foundation, and we would just put a bucket anytime it would rain. Nothing, it's just normal to us. There were times when there were exposed electrical wiring, and so we had to heat the house by the stove in the kitchen. We lived in this home for about 14 years. My mom paid rent to the landlord, and he never made improvements to the dwelling. Then one day, at the age of 16, my family and I became homeless. This event was put into action by a complaint sent to the local housing authority. They received the complaint and they initiated an investigation. City inspectors came to our home, took pictures, and condemned the property, deeming it uninhabitable. We were told we had to leave immediately. To make matters worse, there was a report sent to the Department of Social Services, now called the Department of Children and Families. Imagine my shock at that time. I asked my mom, can I really be taken away because of our housing? Fortunately, DSS at the time, DCF now, recognized the hard work that my mother was doing to take care of us and to provide for us, and they did not remove us. My mother, with a strong faith, she would always say, Jeannie, tough times do not last always. You need to maintain your grades if you want to make it to the other side. Our condition of our apartment does not define us. And so with that, I bring that into my current practice. When I'm meeting with a client, those same words of affirmations I say, your situation will change. Tough times will not be always. The initial petition does not define who your family is. It does not tell the entire story. This homelessness experience fueled my desire to study law. I knew that I wanted to be an advocate on behalf of people similar to my experience. I often grew discouraged though during my journey because I didn't know any lawyers and I didn't know how I would become a lawyer. So after school, I would go to the Dudley Branch Library in Roxbury and I would read books on how to become a lawyer. That's where I created my plan. The road to becoming a lawyer got easier when I met informal mentors along the way. Early mentorship is really important, which is why I always find opportunities to mentor others. I currently serve as a legal mentor in a program called Discovering Justice. I mentor middle school children. I see my impact that I have on those children. These students at the school that I mentor have not thought it possible, like me, that they too can become successful professionals. I graduated law school in 2006, and began working as a public defender for the Committee for Public Counsel Services in September of 2007, Children and Family Law Division. Along the way, I did become hesitant and unsure about my abilities of being a litigator, but I knew it was what I wanted. My mom's words rang out, "You've come too far to turn back now. What do you have to lose? Stay determined, do not get unfocused." And you know, my mom was right. I had nothing to lose, and I gained so much over the past 17 years as a practicing attorney. Each promotion at the Committee for Public Counsel Services brought about a new county, court, lawyers, and new challenges to overcome on behalf of my client. Over the past 17 years, I've had the opportunity and pleasure to work in 9 different counties across Massachusetts, steadily increasing my professional responsibilities. In all of the counties that I've worked in, the judges, clerks, probation, DCF, lawyers, what I've noticed, they all care deeply about resolving the issue or the concern that brought the family or the youth to the court. Each case, each client was not just a docket number, but rather a voice that needed to be amplified. I learned early that if I wanted to make an impact and be the most beneficial to my clients, I needed to listen with an empathetic ear without rushing to judgment. Many times, people do not attempt goals in life because they feel that they have already failed because of fear. I've learned to stand for something or not stand at all. It was because I maintained, fearlessly focusing on my goals, I was able to transcend adversity and get to where I am today. Given my life experience, I can appreciate that people come to the court fearing the judicial process. I have used my patience, optimism, and my journey to assist my clients and the lawyers that I have mentored over the years through difficult times. As a judge, I will continue my commitment to compassion and faithfulness to the law. Judges, in applying the law, can significantly impact the lives of people, whether negative or positive. This impact can shape the culture of a community in which the court operates. Juvenile court in particular is in a unique position to not only change the current circumstances of a child's life, but those changes will have lasting effects for generations as a child transitions into adulthood. Their childhood traumas, interactions, and interventions will have an impact on the type of person that they will become. I am eager to be a part of this critical institution and to do what I can to help families struggling like mine. I am grateful for this opportunity today, and I welcome the questions that you may have.
Thank you, Jeannie. So inspiring. Now we'll give the floor to Counselor Iannella.
Thank you very much. First of all, your counsel was very instrumental in working out the logistics and scheduling your hearings. You did a great job on that.
Thank you.
Very impressed with your presentation. It really was. A lot of supporters here. That's good. And you seem like a really nice person. I like your demeanor. You seem like you're compassionate, clearly hardworking. You're going to be a great addition to the court. You know, I look at your resume and you know what? Sometimes I ask a lot of questions, but I heard you. I get you. You can count on me 100% next week.
Thank you.
No question.
Counselor Sigler.
Thank you, Counselor Civil. Ms. Rhinehart, thank you so much for being here today and for putting your hat in the ring. Congratulations on getting to this stage. I know it's been a long process, so appreciate your patience and your diligence. You know, we had an opportunity to speak prior to this hearing, and I appreciate the time that you spent communicating with me. As we went through your experience, your 17 years of experience dealing with, CRA cases, child protection cases, guardianship, and you expressed that you have a passion for the juvenile court. And of course, in your testimony today, it's clear why you have that passion. And I appreciate you sharing with us what fuels that passion. From the bench, you will have a large impact on many lives of youth. we talked about the juvenile court and the resources that are available. Can you speak a little bit more to your views on the resources that are available and how you will expand it?
Thank you for your question, because I agree, the more resources for our families, the better. And just to expand upon my point that I made, that currently I know there's a resource of the Family Resource Center. That resource is in some courts, not all. I see the impact of having them present in court on the days that court is in session, so that families can connect with the resource center. On the bench, I would like to connect with the community resources that are out there to see if resources such as the Family Resource Center could be in the court that where I'm sitting, because I see that as a valuable resource. I also think, as a judge, it's important to connect with other community resources, perhaps having my court staff reach out to them so that I can, just to see what other resources are out there to bring them into additional resources.
I appreciate that. We also talked about education, and you expressed how many of the, individuals appearing before the court, have limited access. How would you work with, those litigants that are coming before you and ensuring that they have adequate educational access, or that they are aware of the resources that are available to them?
Thank you for that question. Yes, education is very important. As a judge, it would be my responsibility to ask those important questions to the individuals who are present in court. Sometimes children come to court with therapists, teachers. As a judge, I would ask those important questions. What is this child's educational profile in school? I think it's really important when you have a child before you to know, are there any disabilities? Are there accommodating services that are provided in the school? Because I think it's also important to keep that in mind when I'm issuing a decision or I'm assessing a case, what this child's abilities are in order to understand the process.
And so, you've been practicing for over 17 years. This would be a very different role, right? Being on the other side of the bench. What do you see as the greatest challenge that would be before you if confirmed? And what excites you the most about taking on this mantle and this new role?
Thank you for that question. The greatest challenge would be worrying if I touched all the issues and understanding that the juvenile court is very busy, and I understand there's a lot of families that come before the court, making sure that I give the absolute greatest amount of time to each particular case, dotting that I, crossing that T, realizing that I may, be slowing down a process for another family because I'm taking so much time on another case, but just making sure that that family before me is getting the time that they need and the attention and detail that they need. I think that's going to be a balance. And I thought about that, and I know that's going to be, just working to get into a happy place with that, and feeling confident in that. I've taken my time, just making sure that I'm able to get to every issue on a case. And what excites me, I'm excited to be on the bench and see a child come before me and be able to ask them a question and hear their voice. I know as an attorney, it's been really powerful when I would see a judge ask a child about their situation. Being able to do that and just see their eyes and have that communication with them from the bench.
Appreciate that. I appreciate your response as well. And just congratulations again for being at this stage. And with that, no further questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Ziegler. Councilor Kennedy.
I only have a couple of hours worth of questions. But we had a long talk on the phone yesterday, and we spoke once before. You answered pretty much all of my questions. I have to tell you that your statement was very compelling. Your story is very compelling. What I see coming out of you is that you're gonna have a lot of empathy for the kids that come before you. You have one flaw, you know what it is, the lack of delinquency experience.
Yes.
What are you doing to get up to speed?
Yes, I've been reading. I've been reading now, and I reached out to, some of the courts to see if I can, have an opportunity to observe. A delinquency proceeding. I had an opportunity to observe a jury trial last week. I have, plenty of opportunities in my schedule, so I'm hoping to observe more. I will be, just doing a lot of homework, reading on the weekends, after work, before work, to get up to speed.
I misspoke. I shouldn't use the word flaw. I don't think you have any flaws. Just one little hole you had to fill in. But, yeah, you know, we had a long conversation. You're just like a home run. I said that to you yesterday too. I'm voting for you next week, and I told you that yesterday. So,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Kennedy. Counselor DePaulo.
Thank you, Counselor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Congratulations
Thank you.
on being here. You have a compelling story. Thank you for sharing it with us this morning. I just have a couple of questions. I want to talk first about something you were just talking about in the context of other things you were mentioning, and that's understanding like the educational profile of a child who's coming before you. And I'm thinking particularly of children requiring assistance that school districts refer. And so when that happens, a school district refers a child for whatever reason, who's there in the courtroom from the school district?
Yes, usually it's the school resource officer, or sometimes it's the assistant principal.
Okay.
There's also some schools also do, thank you for your question. Some schools also do have a truancy officer that is present in the school. Sometimes it may be like a guidance person. It all depends on the school.
So every district might have its own policy about who they send.
Yes.
And what kind of information would they show up with? I mean, the anecdotes of whatever their complaint is, but what do they have documentation about the child?
Generally, they'll have the attendance record, because if it's, if it's a truancy, they'll have the attendance record.
Yeah.
If it's regarding not following the rules at the school, they'll have the conduct record of the child. And that's usually it.
Okay. Are there ever academic records? Like the status of grades or something?
Yes, the status of grades will usually come with the attendance records to show that, because of the attendance, it would be alleged that this is why the grades are the way they are.
So I'm an attorney, but I've worked in several different school districts, different resourced school districts. And as an educator, two things. One, sometimes I've seen an example of a software platform a school district would use is PowerSchool. That's like a grade book and an attendance monitor. And I've seen printouts of PowerSchool reports, a live update on the student's academics, for example. But I was a teacher, so I know they're not always up to date. So I saw unupdated grade books being presented as if the child is not completing assignments or is not, et cetera, et cetera. And when you're talking about also as an educator, in one district in particular, I was told not to submit comments on a student who I knew had a court appearance coming up. Yet I was the one in the building who knew the student the best. So when you talk about taking the time to cross those T's, I mean, in the education setting, is that something a judge can do? Could a judge ask a child who in the building they're close with and ask for a comment from that person?
Thank you for that question. I think the judge has broad discretion while on the bench, and I think that the judge, it's in the judge's purview to ask as much questions as possible to be informed when the child is before them. The judge can ask, who do you identify with at the school? Who else is involved in the child's life?
Yeah. Sometimes you've talked about trauma, folks who come in with trauma, and oftentimes like some people call a tough love approach, like an old school tough love approach. I don't think it works with traumatized children, but sometimes we need a little tough love, I think, on our school districts to push back on what's going on. In Worcester, a retired juvenile court judge, Luis Perez, did a great job of developing relationships with the Worcester Public Schools when he saw issues that were happening. You've talked a lot about the constellation of stakeholders in every county, the probation officer, everyone in the courthouse is dealing with these cases, who work together and develop their own culture. And you've bounced around counties. Do different counties have different cultures?
I've seen that in different counties, depending on the relationship that different counties may have with the school or with resources in the community, that some counties are more close with
Sure.
those resources.
And obviously, when you talk about matching people with the appropriate resources, you need to know what those resources are within the community, right?
Yes, that is very important.
And so that's why I'm so grateful that you're coming into this role with all these connections already. And why when I look to the future, I'm so hopeful and excited to have folks from the Worcester area who could eventually, based on the needs of the court, sit in Worcester and know those resources really intimately and actually invest in the community and get to know them. I love your experience in community health center, counseling folks. I am very interested in building trauma-informed courts, and I think that some of us don't necessarily have a handle on what that looks like when we're dealing with traumatized people. I know your experience in the health center would provide that, and it's the exact kind of resource we want our judges to be familiar with when they're sitting on the bench. So thank you to your witness who does that work as well. Thank you for being here. I have no further questions. Thank you. Thank you, Counselor.
Counselor DePaulo, Counselor Jacobs.
It's good to see you again. Congratulations again on your nomination. Thank you for coming out and sitting down and we, such an interesting life you've lived and your mother lived and the village that is here today that supported you along the way through you're a person who genuinely understands what it is to struggle and to succeed from a challenging set of circumstances that you lived, your family lived in the best possible way from everything that you shared and love and I kind of want to segue this into a conversation around neglect because we talked about, does poverty equate to neglect? And I think your life story demonstrates no, as much as there's challenge, as much as there's struggle, as much as, you dealt with some, what could be termed very traumatic, like coming homeless is a traumatic experience out of the blue to come home and find your home has been ripped from you. I believe we talked about neglect can come in many forms, right? There can be economic stability and even wealth and still neglect, emotional neglect. Neglect can be, and abuse can be physical or it can be emotional. It doesn't always show marks of it happening. And so I very much appreciate what you bring from your lived experience and your attitude, even today, the things we talked about that you're still doing in your life today that are just so rooted, I think, in being someone who really gets it, who makes pragmatic choices for yourself to thrive and to be able to be connected to your community in a really powerful way. I know I mentioned to you, I don't even know if I mentioned the name or not, but going through your, excuse me, going through your application and the cases along your career, you spent a good deal of time, you started your career out in Western Mass, and a couple of names popped up again and again, and so I reached out and talked to an attorney, an opposing counsel from your early days. And just to share, it was I called Peter Brewer in Great Barrington, who appeared a number of times in your application as opposing counsel. And not only did I wasn't even sure he'd remember you, but not only did he remember you, but he had really glowing things to say about your legal abilities, but who you are as a person, even more so, just how you conduct yourself. And he was particularly wanted to make sure that my attention was drawn to the work you did around disability and advocating for greater just visibility and accommodations and consideration for those who have cognitive or otherwise disabilities in the process with children and families in the court. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about some of the, maybe even just the one case in particular that we talked about, but if there's other cases you want to talk about, but what the challenges you've seen and how the system handles mothers with disability or children with disabilities, and what improvements have come about in result of some of the work you've done, and where you see there still might be work to do.
Thank you for the question, yes. So there was a case I had, and it was in 2015, it was decided in 2015. I represent a child, and she was removed from her mother at birth. And I saw it as, the allegations were, there were concerns due to the mother's cognitive disabilities. And I knew at the very beginning that this was a problem. There was no other issue, there was no other concern really that was in my mind on behalf of this child, why the child should be separated. And so I worked hard over a 2-year period with the Mother's Council, and we were able to get the attention of the Department of Justice, who investigated the case, and they determined that the Department of Children and Families not only violated this family's rights, violated their rights in terms of the Americans with Disabilities Act. That the department also did not provide the necessary accommodations that would help this young mom to be able to parent her child. When that finding was issued from the Department of Justice, a number of things happened. My client did eventually go home, that's what I was really wanting. She was able to go home with her family. But as a result, the Department of Children and Families took a look at their policies and their actions, and they developed a disability policy. The department enacted a disability policy where it provides for situations on how they would provide accommodations when a client can request accommodations, how long it will take for them to receive accommodations. And that policy is pretty expansive, and I think it's a right step in the right direction. And there's still work to be done. I think there's a lot that people, there's disabilities that we can see when someone can't see, or they use a walking device, but there are also disabilities that we can't see. And so I think that as we progress and just learn more about that and just become comfortable with what disabilities are out there, I think that Massachusetts, we're gonna get there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, because, the story you share, it's laden with assumptions, right? Whoever initiated the first call to DCF about this assumed that whatever the mother's cognitive development issues were made her just not able to be a mother. And when we talked about it, the story, it added, an assumption that assumptions are just decisions, but, excluding her mother, who was her support and would have been from the beginning a key component of a larger village that she had. And I say all that because I think assumptions are such a key foundational issue around some of the implicit biases that we know exist across our courts, including juvenile court and at schools and at DCF, and just as humans, right? As humans, we are baked to have biases that if we don't challenge them, if we're not aware of them, if we don't with intentionality, open our minds to, rather than assume, to ask and to explore and to investigate, we end up making mistakes in terms of, incorrectly judging a situation and inserting trauma where it doesn't need to be. I mean, in that story that you shared, it's so wonderful that there was a reunification, but all I can think of is the trauma of the broken bond of the 2 years away from family and mother. And I hope, this is a case that this child probably is now in middle school. I don't even know math, but mathing on that. But I hope they were able to forge a solid bond, and they're thriving there now. But my hope is the court will always take actions to minimize trauma, to be a safe place. And so I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to your thoughts about, from that standpoint, why you want to be a judge and what you think you'll bring to the bench that will be in service to the greater good of children and families.
Thank you for the question. Yes, and speaking on trauma, having a more trauma informed lens is so important. Over the past 17 years, I've come into contact with many clients who suffered trauma. When I think about getting onto the bench and being in a court, and I would like the courtroom to be a very inviting environment. As I said in my statement, I understand that people there's already a fear of the judicial process. As a judge, I have experience in knowing what some trauma, how it may present itself. I have some ways, and I would say that, slowing down during the process is also important. Repeating back to people what's going on. The next court date, letting clients know, people before me know, at the next court date, you can expect this. I think when people know what to expect, that also helps lessen trauma to the extent possible. I would look at my docket to see what do I have before me and determine which cases that if I'm aware, how can I give it a set time? And so that people are not waiting around, anxiously waiting to have their case heard. And also, I also think education never ends. I have taken training. I plan to take additional training to keep myself informed on what's going on in terms of trauma and what is the latest research out there. I think that's very important.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that sensitivity because I'm sure you've had, with the experience that you've had and the cases that you've had and the clients that you've had, experience of the many, many different ways that trauma can show up. The many different ways that it looks, that particularly in the juvenile court, and then particularly thinking about teenagers who already just as cognitive development behaviors of the fully typical teenager, but when you have kids in crisis, right? So teens who are struggling for various reasons to show up in court, teenager plus trauma, plus whatever in mental health, substance, or family, whatever the scenario is that brought that case forward, how trauma is reflected out from the teenagers. Can look disrespectful, can look disengaged, can look a number of different ways that the not trauma informed may well punish what is a trauma response and only just inflame the trauma impacts, right? And just build on it. I definitely have heard of cases where judges found teens in contempt and set them to lockup with strip search and the holding environment that is not rainbows and unicorns experience. And the trauma of that, right? So that, are we helping anything? Are we hurting anything? So I just appreciate the background you bring, the lens that you bring. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Jacobs. I don't have any questions, Jeannie, but congratulations on your nomination. Most of my counselors asked the questions that I was going to ask you, especially on the Gordon case that you touched upon. We had a wonderful meeting where I was able to learn more about you, your personal experience, your professional experience. No doubt in my mind that your mom is shining and smiling upon you. And, your trials and tribulations has set you here today to make sure that you are going to be a representation in the juvenile court as a judge, listening and watching and making sure that, the next generation have a second opportunity, and that it's not how you start, but it's how you finish. So I thank you, and I thank everyone here for coming in and supporting Jeannie, and I think you will do a wonderful job, no doubt about that. So this concludes our hearing. Hearing is adjourned.
I'd like to recognize Counselor Civil for words of inspiration and for leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Thank you. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes. And let's take this moment to remember those that we have lost during the week or during the month as family and friends. As we meditate and reflect on the things that are happening in this world, let's remember of the oath that we have taken to make sure that we are being fair and impartial and making sure that the oath that we have taken, that we will honor and that we will fight for democracy in each and every day of our lives. I pledge allegiance.
United States of America.
And
To the republic,
which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Sonia, how are you? All right. Nice to see the sun out there, that's for sure. I'd like to recognize Counselor Kennedy for a motion to record advice and consent for the financial warrant.
So move, Governor.
Seconded by Counselor Ionella. All those in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it. I'd like to recognize Counselor Ziegler for a motion to record advice and consent for the pending list of notaries public and justices of the peace.
So moved.
Seconded by Counselor DiPaolo. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, the ayes have it. I'd like to recognize Counselor DiPaolo for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Laurel Baracco, Associate Justice of the Probate and Family Court.
Outstanding nominee, Lieutenant Governor. I gladly offer that motion.
All right, motion's made, seconded by Counselor Kennedy. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I will ask Sonia to please call the roll.
Counselor Ferrer,
Yes.
Counselor Civil,
Yes.
Counselor Ionella,
Yes.
Counselor Sigler,
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy,
Yes.
Counselor DePaolo,
Yes.
Counselor Jacobs.
yes.
7 members voting, 7 in the affirmative, the matter carries. I'd now like to recognize Counselor Ferreira for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Bethany Brown to the position of Associate Justice of the Probate and Family Court.
It gives me great pleasure. Governor, she's a remarkable candidate.
Awesome. Motion's been made. Is there a second? Seconded by Counselor Jacobs. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, I'd ask Sonia to please call the roll.
Counselor Civil,
Yes.
Counselor Ionella,
Yes.
Counselor Sigler,
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy,
Yes.
Counselor DePaolo,
Yes.
Counselor Jacobs.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
We're always skipping here.
I know.
I get a little complex.
I understand why, but.
7 members voting, 7 in the affirmative, including Counselor Ferreira, the matter carries. I'd like to recognize Counselor Civil for a motion to record advice and consent for the appointment of Brian Salisbury to the position of Associate Justice of the Probate and Family Court.
Yes, Lieutenant, he'll be a fantastic judge.
Fantastic. I'll take that as a motion made, seconded by Counselor Ferreira. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, Sonia, if you would please call the roll, get a roll call vote.
Counselor Ionella,
Yes.
Counselor Sigler,
Yes.
Counselor Kennedy,
Yes.
Counselor DePaolo,
Yes.
Counselor Jacobs,
Yes.
Counselor Ferrer,
Yes.
Counselor Civil, yes.
7 members voting, 7 in the affirmative, the matter carries. I know that we have also 2 nominations, John Stocks, the position of Clerk Magistrate, Springfield District Court. I don't know if you have a date and time yet, Counselor Jacobs, would you mind? For the hearing?
In my calendar real quick. It is Wednesday, the 26th. I already forgot what we just said, so I think I'm doing 10 a.m.
March 26th at 10 a.m. Duly noted, and I know Counselor Ferreira, we've got Robert Palumbo to the position of Clerk Magistrate for Barnstable County, Town of Plymouth Juvenile Court.
Same day, at 11:15.
March 26th at 11:15.
Yes, please.
Great. I think that concludes our business. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Counselor DiPaolo, seconded by Counselor Ferrer. All those in favor? Any opposed? The ayes have it. Make sure you guys have time for lunch.